Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Human Echoes podcast, the show where we review oddball movies, have oddball discussions, and occasionally take questions from you, the oddball fans.
I'm Tony Southcott.
I'm Albert Berg, and before we get started with our movie for the week, I have a little announcement to make. It's a big announcement, actually. It's a huge announcement, especially if you're listening to this podcast, because this will be the last episode of this podcast. The Human
Most
Echoes...
likely, anyway. We might resurrect it someday, but this is probably the end for this particular movie podcast.
It is going on indefinite hiatus, let's say that. It will still be available for y'all, all the old episodes. If you wanted to go back and listen to us be terrible throughout our early years, and maybe more recently also, that is going to still be there. But we are coming up against a problem where we try to put different amounts of work into the podcast to improve what we're doing and to increase the quality of the product, and it doesn't seem to be cracking the numbers like we'd like. And we want to do something that hopefully can have a bigger impact. Podcasting is already kind of a saturated field. Movie podcasting in particular is very saturated. And
it's like 1 out of every 3 of the active 200,000 podcasts.
Yes. And while I do enjoy talking about movies, and I enjoy talking about them with Tony, we want to see growth. So we will be podcasting still. I'm not going to tell you what we're going on to next.
We might actually try a few different pilot episodes of things, but we have a pretty good idea of what the next one's going to be. That'll probably be up within like a month or so. Like we're still working out the details and everything on that.
We have an idea we're excited about. We'll say that. It could bomb. We actually haven't tested pilot it yet. It will be something that we'll be putting a bit more research and work into. It'll hopefully be a little bit more informative than this podcast is, although I hope that you guys will still enjoy it. It may come out slightly less often. We're discussing a bi-weekly release because of things like research we need time to do. That's all sort of subject to change. Ideas change as you implement them, but we just want to let you guys know where we're at. This is not a joke, and nor is it a slight to anybody. I hope that you guys, you've been with us, if you're still listening to this, on this journey for 250 episodes.
Almost 5 years at this point. Like September would be our 5th anniversary.
We deeply appreciate all of the support that you guys have given. Human Echoes as a company and all the things we're producing is not going anywhere. Me and Tony aren't going anywhere. We're not stopping podcasting. This is not like bad news for Human Echoes.
Yeah, it's not like this whole thing is buried and we're just going to go cry in a corner. It's that every other product that we're trying to make right now is seeing growth, and the ones that aren't are just kind of being cut back a little bit.
Yes.
And a lot of it comes down to, like, people like to start podcasts from the beginning, and if you're looking at a podcast with 250 episodes, it's a little intimidating to go and start that. So there's a lot of reasons behind this. It's something that we did not come to an easy conclusion on, but we decided that it was time to put this to bed for a little bit. You'll still have all of our gaming content. You'll still have whatever new podcast we come up with, all of our Mixer content. You're still going to be getting probably too many hours of us per week in your ears if you desire.
Yeah, and I hope that, Tony touched on a really important thing. I think we've learned a lot about presenting ourselves, about organizing information, and just sort of skilled up to a certain extent from doing this 250 episodes at talking just into a microphone and into a camera. The new one probably won't be video-based, although we may have just the audio only on YouTube anyway. But hopefully we can bring that skill to a certain extent to whatever we do next. And start off with a real strong footing and something that is not quite so saturated as a market, and get our foot in the door and reach a wider audience because we're greedy and we want everybody's money.
Yep, all of it.
But
also, we are still in the deciding phases, so if there's something you want to see us talk about, like, we're always open to ideas and everything. But I think we are pretty set on the first one that we're going to try.
But
you're also going to be able to get the D&D stuff on its own feed. That's going to keep rolling as well.
I'm going to let Tony introduce the podcast. I tried to get into that twice now, and it didn't work. Tony, what's the movie about?
This would be about The Godfather. Movie that Al has been basically dreading seeing for the better part of 5 years now.
Untrue. False accusation. Sad. Fake news.
Just like CNN up in here.
I haven't dreaded it. I never got around to it. It's 3 hours. It's like a period drama piece, which I like well enough, but it's not like the biggest jam that I have, you know? And I was just taking my time getting to it. But since this is our final episode, and this is one of the best movies of all time, by critic measures, all right? People historically find that this is pretty high up there. Citizen Kane, you know, what is the big one? The Shawshank Redemption. People really like that one. This is up there. And Tony has been predicting that I would hate it all this time with my hipster hatred. I do not hate this movie.
Yeah, the dice came up on our side this time.
I feel a little bit of the Paris effect, though, with The Godfather. We talked about the Paris effect on the bonus podcast a while back, where people have seen Paris in movies, and, you know, it looks all beautiful, and, you know, sort of they have this romantic image of Paris built up in their head, and then they go to Paris, and it's just like, well, this is it? And yeah, I feel like having had The Godfather...
This is a city filled with shitty rats.
Okay, so The Godfather's not like that, but I do feel like having had it built up and known about it and having, you know, heard quotes from it and references to it for my entire life, finally seeing it was not a revelatory experience. I wasn't blown away or just shaken to my core. It's a good movie. It's real complicated. There's a lot of characters in it. It's good, though. It looks nice. The superlatives aren't coming to me about this movie. So I guess there's where the hipster comes in a little bit, Tony?
Yeah, I'm just letting you dig your own grave on this one.
Okay, that's fine. Here's my problem. I'm watching this movie, and I keep thinking about... And this is the absolute wrong way to approach any movie, I understand. You should approach it with what it is, not what it could be. But my mind keeps going to the really great television we have today that deals with the same themes that this movie is dealing with. Specifically Breaking Bad, and to a certain extent Better Call Saul as well, and the Fargo seasons that we've gotten so far, although I haven't seen season 3 yet. But you have these incredible stories with a lot of characters and really beautiful cinematography that are able to sort of breathe over the period of, you know, many, many hours. And The Godfather, yes, there is a core story here about Michael Corleone becoming something because, you know, he starts out the movie not innocent, but very outside the family, and throughout the course of the movie, he, you know, turns into somebody who's much more ruthless and more like his dad than he ever wanted to be in the beginning.
Possibly even more ruthless than his dad. He had to adapt to the new way of the world whenever his dad didn't want to change.
That's true, although his adaptation was to try to go legit, so they're not breaking the law all the time.
Yeah.
And so there's some balance there. In some level, he's justifying to himself, I think, that it's worth going this direction. But, like, having seen these kinds of transformations play out over not just one season of television, but many seasons of television, and really feeling that character sink into it, there's something about this story and all of the many, many characters in it that feels very rushed to me, which is not what I was expecting for an almost 3-hour movie.
Yeah, there's just a ton of content in here. I'm sure the book does a little bit better job of letting those characters breathe. But did you know they actually did release this as a longer television series at one point?
We talked about it. I think you mentioned that it was too slow for you. It was on HBO?
Well, it was too slow for a single sitting for 4.5 hours. But they actually released it on TV. Like, I want to say it was in the 80s. They recut it to be like 5 episodes or something like that for the main part of The Godfather, and then they tacked on The Godfather 2 and broke that into 3 or 4 episodes. Huh. So it ended up being kind of a mini-series, and they were able to take a lot of extra footage and insert that in there.
The interesting thing about the runtime on this and the length is that Francis Ford Coppola's original cut was 50 minutes shorter than what original ended up airing in theaters. Like, the studio came to him and said, hey, there's not enough here. We add more family stuff in. And there's part of me wonders if that shorter cut might have not been a better movie, a tighter movie, because there's a lot of stuff in here that isn't about Michael's journey, that is sort of the ancillary around stuff. The thing with the horse's head, what does that add to the plot? I mean, it gives you an idea of who these people are, and it's an iconic scene, and we all know about it, and it was an iconic scene in the novel, which is why they included it. But if we're being honest here, like, you could probably cut that out. There's a lot of stuff in this movie that you could cut out and streamline so it's just Michael's journey, and maybe possibly give him more time, because even though you do see him evolve and go through these stages, there's parts of this where I'm like, I feel like we've missed some of his evolution, that we're sort of jumping in at different points, and we can infer the choices that brought him here, and why he decides to kill these guys, how he gets drawn back into the family, how he decides to become more of a ruthless gangster like his dad when he originally didn't want to. You can put all those pieces together, but if I almost want more connective tissue there for his arc.
Yeah, it did seem like it was kind of abrupt for his just all of a sudden, like, I'm going to walk into the diner and kill these guys.
Well, like, well, that even wasn't so much. I think the walking into the diner was him, like, he's protecting his dad at that point. He's not there to take revenge on the family. That's not what he's being pulled in. They've made a second attempt on his dad's life at that point, I believe, in the hospital.
Yeah, the cops were coming in basically to kill his dad. Right,
and so he's reacting personally, because he got punched in the face by a crooked cop who was paid off by the rival family, and B, knowing that they're probably not going to give up assassination attempts, and he needs to nip this in the bud. And regardless of his feelings about the family business at that point, he does love his dad, and he doesn't want to see him get shot. So his actions there, I thought, made sense. It was more about once he was in Sicily, I guess. I was going to say Italy, but back home on the old homestead, the whole romance between him and the girl whose name I've forgotten, I think it was Apollonia,
something like
Apollonia.
that.
It was a Greek-ish name that goes by really quickly, and then her death comes kind of out of nowhere. Not out of nowhere. I mean, it's an important part of the plot, but he's getting with her before his bruise from being punched in the eye is healed. And we were
right after he left his wife or his fiance back home or whatever.
Yes, and we're made to believe that he really did care about her. And you can understand, lonely guy looking for a girl, way far away from his fiance. Maybe he's going to let some of that stuff that he said when she was right there slip a little bit. But he's getting married. Like, he's putting down roots, and maybe he's wanting to just put all that behind him. But again, I wanted more of that detail work. And a lot of what Al Pacino does in this movie is sort of a blank-faced, kind of stony-eyed look, which is maybe makes sense for his character, but I wanted more from him. I wanted to track with him a little bit better. And because the movie is, while it is the story of the family, it's really his story, his progression as a character throughout. I felt like that was something that was kind of lacking. But I've only seen it once. I mean, I know there are many people out there who've seen it 100 times since it came out, maybe more.
I've probably seen it 10 times. It's one of the longer movies I've repeat watched.
And I like that his dad kind of has the opposite arc. Like, his dad starts out as this lion, and you see him sort of in his full power at the beginning at this wedding, and he's granting requests and giving people advice and telling them how they need to live their lives. And he is being eclipsed by a new world. He's got something new happening, with the new drug trade that's coming in, and his reaction to that is not acceptance. He says, this is bad stuff. Politicians are going to fight us on this. We need to not be getting into this business because it'll be bad for us. There'll be a lot of more bloodshed. It'll drag us down into the mud. And I think probably he's right, but everybody else is wanting to move on with the times, and his action is ultimately to step back and just, give up the power and go back to playing with his grandkids, and he gets a better death than he deserves ultimately. I mean, it's kind of a sad death. Like you do.
It's a weird death more than it is sad, I think.
Well, he's playing with his grandchild, and there's that sort of juxtaposition of the the new and the old, right? That he's leaving the scene, and this kid is just getting birthed into it. He's gonna just now, probably doesn't understand at all what is going on behind the scenes, but he's peaceful. He's been responsible for deaths and beatings and all kinds of vice throughout the city, and he's never punished. I mean, he gets shot up at one point, but he does heal. And
he only gets shot like 6 times in the back. It's okay.
Yes. I thought that it was cool that they had him survive, and it was a great moment leaving the me as a viewer in the dark, because you see him shot and you think like, oh, I thought he was the main character of this. Is he dead already? Which would have been a great twist. Not knowing that he's going to survive at that moment, and the other characters not knowing if he has survived or not, really is a great play on the audience. Because it's more, even back then, like even if you weren't thinking, well, it's, he's the Godfather, he's the titular character, why is he now getting killed? Like, it's Marlon Brando as the Godfather, who in the 70s when this came out was just a giant name. It was him and, I forget who they said the other guy was that they were up, Laurence Olivier. They were like, the 2 best actors in the world are Marlon Brando and Laurence Olivier, and Laurence Olivier is way too English, so we're going to go with Marlon Brando, because he's the guy.
Also, it's interesting that character probably has, 25 minutes of screen time? Maybe less?
It's less than an hour. He's in a minority of the film. He's not despite the fact that again, I don't think he's the title character, and he's on the poster, and he's the biggest name in the cast, but I don't think it's really his story. The Godfather, to me, is ultimately Al Pacino. Like, him becoming the Godfather.
That's like the entire end sequence is him becoming the Godfather.
Yes.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, you're right. I kind of had let that slip my mind, but and it's great that montage is, an interesting juxtaposition of that. Again, there's the literal Godfather scene where he is there at the confirmation of this child, of his sister's baby, and also the scene where he's taking the reins of power in the family by having everybody else eliminated. I didn't even think about what that was saying there. I thought it was a cool juxtaposition, but I didn't think about, oh, wait, yeah, he's literally becoming the Godfather. And I'm dumb, Tony. I'm a bad... This is probably why I didn't enjoy the movie as much as everybody wanted me to.
You're just turning your critical eye instead of just sitting back and enjoying it.
I did enjoy some of it, though. I mean, it's not. I didn't not enjoy it. I enjoyed the family interaction. There was a lot of drama there, a lot of tension building up. Although, again, I feel like there's a certain aspect of standing on the shoulders of giants where the cinematography for this movie is nice, but at the time it was super revolutionary because of how dark it was, and the studio got these prints of this film and how it's super underlit. Not that you can't see anything, but it's these dark rooms lit by windows and maybe a lamp or two on the actors' faces, and they complained to Francis Ford Coppola and said, "Well, what are you doing that for? We can't see anything." It's like, guys, it's literally a shadow organization. Like, they're gonna have shady dealings. We're gonna literally have them in the shade. It's okay. We can see the characters. You can see what's happening. It's not too underlit. And because of movies like this popularizing that style, we've seen a lot of experimentation since then. Again, I'm going to go to Better Call Saul, partly because I just finished the 10th episode. I did the recap. And, I think about the lighting in Charles McGill's house, where he doesn't have electricity, and it's all done with either outside sunlight coming in and painting these really great contrasting lights on the inside of his house, or with his lantern. And we've just, and part of that's the technology that's just allowed us to capture light better with cameras that they just didn't have at the time, where before you had to have a lot of light to be able to see anything. Now you can do it with less and still have visibility. But as a modern audience member, I've seen stuff like this already, so it's not groundbreaking for me like I'm sure it was in 1972 when Francis Ford Coppola is fighting the studio about, guys, we don't have to have it blown out and completely lit like a stage, all right? We're good.
And I always enjoy that much more darker view anyway. The only times that this movie gets really bright, it almost seems out of character for the movie, like whenever he's in Sicily.
Or the wedding scene. That was something I wasn't expecting. And coming into this movie that I know is this very dark, violence-driven drama, to start off there with that brightly lit outside, a bunch of, like, a big crowd of people, all of this stuff is not what I would, like, my impression of The Godfather was before going into it. But it really does set up, the literal family aspect of this movie, because it's a wedding and you're dealing with this guy, you have Don Corleone saying, where's Michael? I need Michael here. Like, he's clearly the favored son, and yet not fully in the fold. He's sort of sitting on the outskirts, telling his girlfriend about all the, escapades that Don Corleone gets up to, and the whole make him an offer he can't refuse, which has less power because I've heard it since then. So, like, I heard it before the movie a bunch of times, but they say it a number of times in the movie, and it gets repeated. I didn't expect it to be repeated as much as it was. The make him an offer he can't refuse.
Yeah, after watching it this time, I kind of noticed that was peppered in more than I expected. One of the things I wish we could have seen that probably would have happened if it had just a little more time, I wanted to see Luca Brasi do his thing instead of just get garroted.
Again, if this was 3 seasons of a television show like it could have been, I mean, that him getting garroted would have been like season 5 cliffhanger, like throwing the rest of the season. I swear, I'm thinking about this like it could have been a TV series, and I guess kind of it was. I mean, you go to The Sopranos, and that's really what they were doing. But it blows my mind that they haven't adapted this, and I know it's
that's like a mortal sin type thing. Like, there are a lot of remakes people will tolerate, but I think you're still 5 to 10 years out before people would even consider letting The Godfather happen. Like, they've made some video games where they took a lot of the same actors to do the voice work, at least the ones that are surviving, because looking through IMDb, a lot of this cast is dead. But they actually did expand on the story, give some side details, put in a lot of different things that you didn't get to see from the main storyline. So they were able to make it like a 30, 40-hour thing that you play through.
I guess it just, like, I mean, watching this, it feels like Game of Thrones, but if you told the first season in like 3 hours. And
there's probably a supercut like that online, if I had to guess, but it wouldn't be nearly as deep.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, I don't. Again, you talked about this. Maybe it's just anathema to people that you would touch this at all. But I think that either you go shorter and just make it Michael's story with a little bit on the side, or you go bigger and really give all of these characters sort of their moments in the sun and their time to shine and really make us feel it when they get killed. Luca Brasi, like you said, he's talked up as this sort of giant enforcer, and I love his moment, which I found out on IMDb from the trivia page. He actually did flub the line, like when he's going to meet Don Corleone.
After practicing it all the time in the previous scene, that was actually not intentional.
Yeah, no. So they filmed the scene where he flubs the line first, and he was literally nervous to be across from Marlon Brando. He was someone who may have been an actual mob enforcer at some point in his real life. There's a whole wonderful secret life of this movie where the real life mafia got involved as well and pulled strings to get characters' parts, just like the same character that had strings pulled for him in the movie had strings pulled for him by his mafia friends to make it into the movie.
That's
weird
meta
stuff.
Yeah. I did find it interesting. We were talking about different beats that they actually resolved all of the things from the very opening scene of the movie where he's having to do those requests. Like, it seemed like they were just kind of peppering some of that stuff in for style and to show you how Don Vito is. And then all of it came around, like the whole horse in the bed, the way the funeral director had to take care of Sonny. Just all of it actually did end up getting used.
I thought that was going to be a bigger ask, honestly. When he comes to him and he's like, I will need a favor from you in the future. I didn't think it was going to be like, will you do some pro bono funeral work for me? I thought it was going to be like, put a bomb in my son's corpse so that when all the families come to show their respects, even though they bumped him off, like it blows them up or something. I thought it was going to be like a big sacrifice, not just, listen, I'm not going to be paying for this because I did beat up those two guys for you.
Well,
earlier.
Under the circumstances, it was entirely different because he was giving up vengeance in that situation to try to unite everybody again. But I think that it was more important. Like there's kind of a subtle thing about how much Don Vito actually cares about his wife, and like just how connected he is to her in this. Even though I don't even know if you really see her in this movie, like he's trying to protect her from having to see like the violence that his lifestyle has brought on her kid.
There are only one scene where they're seen together, and that's at the wedding when they're taking the picture. So that's the only time when the two actors were acting on set with each other. But I think you brought up an interesting point about the wives, because the sister character is another, like, this is a very testosterone heavy movie, like a lot of dudes driving the story.
It's not going to pass the Bechdel test, I can tell you that.
It is not. And one thing that I wish there was more of was more characterization. Even forget about the Bechdel test. The fact that the sister is kind of just like, her character's there, but she doesn't get a lot of stuff to do. You get that one scene where she's going crazy, and she had been beat up by her husband earlier. And there's a really great story about this woman who's stuck in this family. Like, she can't do anything. She doesn't have any power. People are maybe using her to get to her dad or whatever, but she's kind of a pawn and she feels helpless. But just throwing her in that one scene where she's throwing dishes just makes her look like a crazy person. Again, you can put the pieces together and see how she got there, but they don't they don't give us that groundwork. And I would love to see the build up to that snap rather than just, I'm crazy and I'm gonna throw stuff around and that's gonna make, kick all this other stuff off. I want the TV show. I'm sorry if you think that this is untouchable, but it's not. It's a great story.
It's pretty untouchable.
It's a great story that could be told again in a different way.
Well, they already took a lot from this movie. Like, think about the various scenes where Walter White has to go and take out entire groups of people. Like, there's a lot of influences from this on Breaking Bad and so on. Like, especially with the timing, the way things like just all went down. Like, it very much felt like those were directly influenced from this. So you're kind of getting the show, even if you're not getting the show exactly.
Oh, yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, this is definitely the giant upon whose shoulders many others have stood. But there are things in this movie that, I mentioned tension, but there are some stuff that could have been built up longer and more if they had a longer running time. The fact that they had to cut it down to be under 3 hours means that you lose some stuff that could have been like really drawn out and made you really sit on the edge of your seat a little bit more. When he's in the bathroom looking for that gun, that scene, I'm not saying it's a bad scene, but I can see a version of that scene where you're just like biting your nails and like, somebody comes knocking on the door and he's fumbling around with it or whatever. Cause I mean, he is an army guy. So again, if you had the whole television show, you could flash back to him in the army and sort of what he thinks about killing. He has killed before, but there could be more to that if you could tell it in a longer form.
Yeah, and there is a difference between the way he killed before. His brother highlights that. He's like, this isn't shooting somebody from 100 yards away. This is close enough that you're going to get brains on your nice jacket. That
kind of read to me, though, as his brother just being condescending, like sort of brushing off his war efforts. Like, his brother just wasn't there. I think my read on Michael is that he was really affected by the war stuff and would like to get away from it. The fact that which brings back the fact that he's drawn back in all the more tragic, because he wanted not to be involved with this stuff. He wanted to make a difference for good, and maybe he does in the end. Like, we don't see in this movie, I don't know what Godfather 2 does. I know that it does a lot of flashing back, but it would be interesting to see if Michael does actually end up succeeding in his goal to make the mob, the mafia, the family a less... I mean, they're still probably going to be working on the gray areas of the law, but maybe where they're not killing people so often because they've got casinos and they always win anyway. So that's legit business.
Oh, you definitely need to see the second one someday. Just watch it in 2 parts because that one is like 4 hours long.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. We did get a few questions related to this movie, and this one feels like it's relevant to right now. Comic Noobs asks, do you feel like Michael's character progression against the family, reluctant participant to leader, was earned in the film?
Well, I kind of covered that already. I think that there's enough there where it's not like, oh, why would he do that? That doesn't make any sense. Like, you can put the pieces together. I would have liked for it to have been earned better. But I don't want to repeat myself too often. Like, you only have so long, and they wanted to adapt this novel, which was very influential at the time. I haven't read it. I don't know how it stacks up to the film.
Yeah, I haven't read anything from Mario Puzo yet.
Apparently, it's pretty faithful. It's not. I love the fact, and this is really weird to me, watching this, when the title comes up, as a modern moviegoer, you're just used to, if there's a name there, it's going to be the director's name. And it's not Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather. It's Mario Puzo's The Godfather. Which is
like, based
different.
on some of the things I've heard about Francis Ford Coppola, it seems like his ego would rarely let him do something like that.
Well, he was so... I mean, he said he tried to keep the script as close as possible to the book. He gives... I don't think he had to give, although it may have been required. Mario Puzo actually gets a script writing credit in the movie. I don't know how much work Mario Puzo did on the finished script. I think Francis Ford Coppola kind of did a lot of work on it, but he based so much of it on the novel that he felt like that the credit needed to go to Mario Puzo. And you do see a lot of the... from what I have read, it seems like that there is a lot of stuff from the novel. The horsehead scenes directly from the novel. I always
got
the
the
lot
feeling
of the stuff's
they,
from the novel, but some of the stuff that you may not need to actually tell the story, they brought in anyway because they wanted to do a faithful adaptation.
I feel like a lot of Don Vito's lines were probably lifted directly from the novel as well, just the way it kind of has some exposition, the way it's framed. It didn't always feel like standard movie dialogue, so it felt like that might have been brought over directly.
I thought it was interesting, too. They brought in Francis Ford Coppola because he was an Italian guy. And they said, listen, we've seen a lot of gangster films that were made by sort of Americans that have the Italians are talking like this. And I forget who it was. One of the producers said that he wanted to smell the spaghetti. And you really do get that flavor. I mean, the mob involvement in the real film is... kind of debated exactly how much it was. Francis Ford Coppola in more recent years has sort of said, no, that wasn't really that much. But maybe you would say that if you didn't want to get hurt by the mob. Yeah,
but by now it's probably like so far beyond beyond what they would care about that if you kept it vague, they wouldn't care.
Maybe. It's an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, and movie studios like to pump stuff up like that because it helps get some word of mouth going.
That's true, but it does feel very real. There's stuff that feels very Italian, not just spaghetti, but the details of how they're cooking the spaghetti. The fact that there's the Godfather himself dies in a tomato garden, which I'm sure was being grown for the spaghetti. And the details of how the mob acts towards each other. The sort of embellished machismo and but still restrained respect. That all feels very real. I don't know if it is real, but it seems to have come from a genuine place where it wasn't just somebody writing a script. The people who, along the various parts of the chain, obviously cared greatly about capturing at least some of the real elements of what Mafia life was like back in the time.
Yeah. And that actually goes into a question that we got asked by Rich Alex over on Twitter. It says, accurate portrayal of early Mafia life in America or tall tale from the good old days? Why does it resonate with so many people?
I don't know how accurate it is. Because I wasn't alive back then, and I'm not a historian of the Mafia, so it's difficult for me to be like, it's legit, guys. I can't tell you. I don't know. Go ahead.
From what I've read of from different Mafia books on looking up, the original Scarface, Al Capone, all these other different things, like, and just seeing how they actually did go legit by going to Vegas. It seems like the underpinning is there, but I can't get super into the details. But a lot of people think that, like, with a show like, or like with the Mafia, it would be just constant hits and constantly doing this. It's like a lot of times it's going to be a little bit more mundane than that. It's going to be running protection. It's going to be collecting money. It's going to be like people are just generally staying in line and not grading against it. But that's not where the story is. It's like The Sopranos constantly had violence happening whenever it probably wouldn't have in real life. So it feels like it's somewhere in between. Like, it might be a little bit embellished, but there were times when these families would go to war. Like, I'm trying to remember the name of the massacre. It's like Valentine's Day Massacre or something like that. And you just have, like, an entire group of people gunned down by another mafia group. So it definitely happened. But I'm not sure how much prestige these guys actually had, how loyal their people would be. Like, so I don't have enough background on the history of it to tell.
I know for, having heard things, that one of the, like, that there was the positive aspect of the Mafia as well, that the people who were high up in the Mafia worked hard to curry favor with the people who they ruled over. That they weren't just, like, thugs, busting people on the streets. They legitimately did enforce what people saw as justice when it seemed like maybe it wasn't being enforced well enough to the other people. So you get... So go ahead.
Originally, like, the Mafia was even brought about because of fascism. It was kind of a response to fascism, a way to fight back against corrupt officials, against the cops, against everything else. It was a way to protect the people. And, of course, eventually that gets corrupted and turned into them being the oppressors. But that's where it actually originated, was fighting back against these sorts of forces that were against justice.
The really interesting thing to me, and I can't imagine you would make this up, so I'm going to assume this is a real historical detail. When you see the news clippings of the stuff that's going on, they're like, everybody knows that Don Corleone is the Godfather. Like, everybody knows all of the inner workings of these gangs. They're not, like, keeping it on the DL. They're like, oh yeah, this guy totally bought off all these politicians, and it's not a secret at all. It's out there for basic public knowledge, which I don't see that as much these days. I mean, I guess there are things that people know about people that don't really get discussed openly, but
those are pretty big things to get discussed. Like, I'm not sure how big that actually was either, although I'm sure there were a lot of people who knew who Al Capone was. I'm sure there were a lot of people that, like, had interactions with people, and they were like, you really shouldn't mess with that person. But I don't know if everybody would know exactly who's been bought and paid off.
The great thing, and again, you only get a little bit of it, but there's a point where they leak that a cop has been paid off by one of the other families to make the hit on him look better for them. Like, they're playing public relations with the papers. They go to the people with the newspapers and feed them stories so that it looks like their case is a little bit better. I mean, it feels almost, I mean, and I guess it is to an extent, these are legitimate, giant air quotes, obviously, legitimate governments, but they're doing the same kinds of things that the rulers of countries do. Yes, there will be atrocities, but, they're also trying to protect their people, and they're trying to protect their own interests, and yes, they will occasionally go to war, but it's not always a good idea, and they will try to have truces, and they will have petty squabbles. Like, these power structures aren't really that much different than a real government power structure would be. Sorry, I didn't have anywhere else to go with that. It's just,
all right.
that was that thought, Tony. And now on to the next one.
We still do have some questions based on this movie. Like,
okay.
Joe asks, what is your favorite moment or quote from this? And I think my favorite quote has to be like, leave the gun, take the cannoli.
That's a good one.
What about you? Or have you not seen enough to really...
Oh, man. There was one moment that I really... I mean, there's obviously the montage where all the guys are getting shot with the baptism at the same time. That's great. There was something... It's such a thick movie, too. There are so many things that happen that it's difficult to like it's difficult to remember what it was, but there was something that I was like, oh wow, this is awesome. Oh, it was when that one lady got out her boobs. That's what it was.
Oh, Italy, just bringing out the titties.
No, the baptism scene is obviously great. The scene where the guy goes to the toll booth and gets shot in the toll booth, which I didn't fully understand how they set that up. And again, super dense movie that if you're not following all the names and all the connections and everything precisely, it's real easy to miss stuff. But
I can kind of tell you how they set that up. Like, they knew that Sonny was going to be coming after his brother-in-law if he heard that the violence had happened again, and he just belted the hell out of his sister. So you've got him coming out there. They know the route he's going to take, and basically they set it up so that at that toll booth that they knew he was going to be driving to, like, they were just waiting for him.
You think that toll booth guy made it out okay? I mean, he
feel
ducked,
like,
but
yeah,
that wasn't a super bulletproof toll booth.
Yeah, I feel like the Rolls Royce that was in front of it was kind of bulletproof, but not bulletproof enough for my liking.
Okay.
Like, I feel like they could have just had, like, I don't know if they needed that guy on that side. Like, I feel bad for him.
Well, it needed to look legit for that moment. Although I guess if he'd rolled up and there wasn't anybody there, it still would have been that moment of what's going on, and they could have, popped up and blasted him. And they could, if they'd done it from that side, they would have had a point blank shot. So
yeah,
I found the flaw in the Godfather, Tony. I'm gonna blow this case wide open. These guys are stupid.
I don't know. It worked. Could you really say it's stupid?
No, I'm just kidding.
James Caan was turned into Swiss cheese.
There was speaking of moments that caught my eye, this was not a favorite moment, but I'm reading the history of 3M right now, and they're currently inventing Scotch tape. And when they gave him the gun with the duct tape wrapped around the handle, I haven't looked this up, but I was like, did they have duct tape in 1940, whatever it was?
I don't know if that was exactly duct tape.
Well, I don't know what kind of tape it was. You're right. It was gray.
Yeah, it was like something that like basically fingerprints wouldn't form on, like the oil just wouldn't connect or something.
I'm looking it up on Wikipedia. Oh, in the yeah, okay, it was before World War II, but they had some of it, so it could have been around. This is a rabbit trail, but the fact that like there was a time when they had tape and they're like, what do we do with this tape? It keeps like after we pull it off the roll, it keeps going back and sticking, and it's hard to do with both hands, and you have to use scissors, and this is super annoying. When they first invented the clear tape, reading about that, it blows my mind because I know that tape dispensers are a thing, but I can't I'm thinking about trying to remove them from my mind, and would I come up with the tape dispenser on my own if I didn't know about it already?
I feel like I'd come up with something, maybe not something as simple and elegant as a tape dispenser, but I don't know. Like I feel like I could figure that out given enough time and some resources.
Yeah, duct tape, the Scotch tape. Anyway, I'm reading a really great book right now. It's called Brand of the Tartan. It was published in like the 50s, so it's old. But 3M is even older. So 3M had been around for more than 50 years at that point, and they had a lot of great history that they're covering. And I'm learning about how tape was invented around the same time that this movie happened, Tony.
And how to make a lot of mistakes.
That was a really great thing to learn, is that they had no idea. Like there's a lot. They're experimenting with tape. They didn't even know what kind of tape they wanted to make initially, and then they're like, "What do we put it on the back of this clear stuff?" And then like they're trying out all these different kinds of glues, and they make one that they send out, but then it turns out it only lasts for like 30 days before the glue starts to not work anymore. And I mean, the development process and the number of mistakes they made, and the fact that they're still super successful, makes me happy. It makes me realize that we can make mistakes.
Yeah, we definitely
still
can
be successful. So, and a lot of other good things. I really enjoying that book. I'm not going to say there's nothing more to say about The Godfather. I feel like my thoughts have mostly run their course for my first viewing. Is there anything else that you would like to cover on this movie, Tony?
Not entirely. I mean, this is the movie that kind of made the whole, made everybody wish they were Italian for a little bit. It glorified the mafia in a way that people really hadn't seen before. Like, you had other movies, like, I think, does Chinatown actually precede this one? Like, I'm not sure which one came first. This was 1972. But, like, this is just such an influential movie for me. Like, it's part of the reason why I have a gangster tattoo on me. It's
Chinatown 74.
All right, so not too far after. But it was just such a perfect and influential movie for whenever I was maybe like 10 years old, 12 years old when I first saw it. And I was like enraptured by it even at that age. Like it's just fascinating how long this has endured and how it's still considered one of the best ever. And going back and watching it today, even after all the movies we've critiqued and everything else, seeing that it is still of superior quality despite being like 45 some years old now.
You know, you mentioned something that I think is very interesting. You talked about how this movie glorifies the mafia, and that is something that they had problems with, because the initial director they approached to make this movie was Sergio Leone, and he looked at the script and said, well, this makes like the mafia look like the heroes and the good guys, which is, I think, John Jones predicted that I would have a problem with the people being bad guys and unlikable, and I understand the story without having to make that comment. Like, you can still have a compelling story with bad characters, but it does kind of vindicate. Yes, it doesn't vilify these guys. It makes them look cool and awesome. And Francis Ford Coppola initially had the same problem. He initially said, like, I don't want to make a film that glorifies the mafia, but then his sort of out was, okay, but I'll make it as like this allegory for American capitalism, which, I mean, you can read it like that, but I think a lot of people went in this and came out thinking, no, the mafia is cool, guys. I want to be the mafia.
I want to be a made man.
So I wonder if they, and not that maybe it's a failure on the audience's part more than Coppola's part, but that was a very real concern that people had, and to a certain extent, I think that it turned out to be a true problem that people would have in interpreting the movie. That they would see these guys as the good guys when they're not really.
No,
I mean, you can cheer for them to a certain extent.
The main thing that they did to make them still likable is that you didn't see the innocents that get caught in the crossfire. Like, without that, and Marlon Brando's character talks about it a little bit, about like how the drug culture is going to be taking out a lot of people that are innocent, and it's going to be something that's going to drag them down, and that's why the politicians and everything are going to fight them. So, like, they're trying to show a family in transition with that too. But because you don't see that action, you don't see how many innocents get killed in these gunfights. It's always very targeted. Only one person gets hit, like that sort of stuff. Like, you don't have something where you see their moral ambiguity or just their outright terrible morals against people that don't, quote unquote, deserve it.
One thing that I did think was interesting, it was reminded to me by you bringing up that particular scene. When the scene where Marlon Brando is talking about, I don't think this drug stuff is good. He eventually says, like, this is a vice too far. It's not just the common thing that people want, like women and booze and, you know, gambling. This is essentially taking all of that and, like, this on a different level. It's unsustainable in his eyes. And I think to a certain extent, like, that's a legitimate fear, even though I think that our approach to dealing with drugs is wrong. Like, what drugs do to your system is not something that you can replicate easily with regular human vices. It's just like, here you feel good. And we're going to push the feel button a bunch of times. Punch, 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 punch.
Yeah. And it's like there are ways to get like serotonin dumps and everything, but none of them are going to measure up to that shot of heroin.
Yeah. But in that scene where he's sort of giving his case to the rest of the Dons, and they have the big meeting of all the people. I love the mention of Kansas City because I'm a fan of Fargo Season 2. Kansas City's there. And he talks about this, but one of the Dons stands up and he says, well, the way I've gotten around it was I'm going to regulate it, and we're going to sell it to the black people. And his super racist, like, just offhand comment about black people.
What did he say? They're animals anyway. It won't matter.
Yeah, so let them lose their souls?
Yeah, let them lose their souls. That's what it was.
I don't want to come across as being like, yeah, that really spoke to me. But I think that a lot of times we spend movies of the era either are like just about the racism, right? Like Quentin Tarantino and the Hateful Eight and the what's Django Unchained, right? Right, like they have everybody throwing around the N-word, and or it's like papers over that because we don't want to be offensive, and even if they are the bad guys, like they're not that bad of guys. And to have one of these characters just kind of stand up and be like, "Oh yeah, like we don't really care about black people anyway, right, guys?" As just part of the environment, and nobody flinches and nobody reacts because that's just the air that they breathed at the time. I respected the decision to include that, and I think even in 1970 it would have been a little like, well, especially because you're coming off of the civil rights movement, and so that's
Yeah,
very
I'm sure there
fresh.
are a lot of people that are like, ew, just like kind of wincing at that a little bit even then.
Maybe more so. I think maybe the fact that we've gotten some distance between us and we feel like we've fixed it makes it like less of a nerve for us. I don't know how much of it we fixed. It's an interesting question of like how like we have people talk about implicit bias, but then like more recently it feels like people have really felt more comfortable with speaking up with their explicit bias as well. And that's kind of creepy to see that that's still a very real force in our nation.
Yeah, well, at least at 1972, although it wasn't for the time period of the movie, on paper it was all equal again. So at least they had just gotten through that. When was the Civil Rights Act signed? Like 69?
I don't know the history of it. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, I know I've been taught this over and over and over. Like I swear, about 50% of the history I did in school was about the Civil Rights Movement, but I can't remember the dates to save my life. Like, they taught us more about the Civil Rights Movement than about the Revolutionary War.
Interesting. I did not get that. I went to a more, I guess, conservative style school in high school. I mean, they talked about it, but it wasn't like a giant focus. It was part of what we actually got although it's impressive that they talked about it with you, because one of the specific history classes we had to take was 20th century history, because for the logic that a lot of history classes get bogged down in the Revolutionary War and the Civil War and like, sort of breeze through World War I and World War II and that's it. And they wanted us to have like a contemporary idea of what the 20th century was like, and some of that stuck. But it seems like a lot of history is sort of more ancient, like founding fathers type history, and doesn't get taught. So it's good that they had that aspect of your history class.
Yeah, we got a fair bit of that, but we also got some interesting stuff, like where my teacher brought in a bunch of Vietnam War veterans, had them talk, and I remember when one of them walked into the classroom late, and you could tell that he was walking on 2 prosthetic legs and everything, and just like sat down to have a long talk with us about what Vietnam was really like. So we had some pretty interesting stuff, especially for the 20th century stuff, like some very much like first level sources.
Yeah. And history goes on. As we are still in the longest now running war that the U.S. has ever been in Afghanistan. That's still happening, and
that
I'm not
literally
gonna say people
been
don't
more
care.
than half my life. Because I'm 30 now, and it's been going for like 16 years.
It seems like people have just forgotten that we're still fighting over there, and it seems like we're not making progress. And we continue to make mistakes and hopefully continue to try to learn from them as a country. Yeah. I hope we get better at some point.
Yeah. Someday, maybe we'll figure it out. On a slightly higher note, we actually heard from someone we haven't heard from in a long time today. Miss Jen Gautreau, Mortem Posts on Twitter, asks, "What's your favorite Brando movie?" Mine's a tie between Streetcar and Dr. Moreau.
I might not have seen very many movies with Marlon Brando in it. Oh, wait. Okay. I have one. Do you have one?
I do.
All right. You go first.
I want to say Apocalypse Now, even though his character wasn't, like, in it a ton. He was still in it more than Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness as Kurtz. But, like, there was just something so intriguing about the interactions whenever he was on screen. And I know he came in, like, super overweight for that movie, so they had to film him in the dark and, like, all this other stuff. But it was still just a fascinating movie. And I have no idea why, but that movie always captivated me. His character always captivated me. And it was just fascinating. This movie could probably be a very, very much a second to that for my favorite Brando movies. But I also haven't seen Dr. Moreau or Streetcar.
I have not seen those either. I had never finished Apocalypse Now. I got to the part where he was about to meet him, and I got bored, and I turned it off. Charlie
That's
Sheen.
That's another Coppola one, isn't it?
It is, yes, I think.
Yeah, and he got a lot of the same actors. Like you got Robert Duvall in that one. Like,
That was many years ago, by the way. I probably would have finished it today if I was watching it. I just never got back around to it. My favorite is Superman, the movie.
because he was Jor-El, right?
He was Jor-El. I just like that movie. He has a good role in it. It's not a big role, but I have a newfound fondness for that, if just for the reason that people have started saying that the score for the more recent reboot Man of Steel is better, and I'm not gonna say nothing beats dan da 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 dan bum bum bum, but that doesn't beat it. Okay, the 2000 whatever year Man of Steel came out, like that score is fine. It ain't no Superman the movie score. Okay, that's just,
I don't know. The new Wonder Woman score like gives me goosebumps every time I hear it.
like the whole score. You listen to the whole soundtrack.
I actually did pick up the soundtrack on Google Play.
Cool. You seem like you're embarrassed to say that, Tony.
Oh, I usually don't get like super into movie soundtracks.
Oh.
I just really like what they did. I even like that they had it for Wonder Woman, but they made it more like the period stuff, and the only time you actually hear the guitar riff version of it is during the credits.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I thought for sure, like when she went into battle, like it did hit the.
It was an orchestral version of it.
Oh, okay.
So like it was just, if I'm remembering it right, I'm pretty sure it was just the guitar riff one. Whenever you get
you have
credits,
the soundtrack,
right.
Tony. You're the expert. I just went to the movie one time.
They had both versions of it on there. So
okay. There was a great orchestral version. I don't know what the name of the guy is. He's directing the music. He's scoring the new Spider-Man Homecoming, and he posted on Twitter him directing the orchestra playing the da-da-dun, da-da-dun, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, which is just amazing. I love that so much.
I think that this is probably Michael Giacchino or Giacchino.
Giacchino, yes, that sounds correct. Another Italian guy, probably.
Yeah,
and it was.
If that's not Italian, I don't know what is.
I don't know if that's going to be in the movie, but I really want it to be in the movie, like the credits or something, because that's great. And the other thing from Superman the movie is the theme from Krypton, the dum bum 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 bum. Like, that's awesome when you're like building up to that and this orchestra just like explodes at the end. Bum bum. No, the 2006 Man of Steel does not beat that, or whatever year it came out. It was probably much more recent than that. I don't know why I'm thinking 2006.
2006 was Superman Returns, wasn't it? Or was that even earlier than that?
I think that was earlier than that. I'm looking it up now. 2013. I knew it was
2006 is Superman Returns. Man of Steel was 2013.
Yes. Okay.
Superman Returns was just weird to me.
Yeah. I don't have very many thoughts about that movie. I don't hate it. It's not like, that's the worst movie ever. It's just sort of a little bit bland.
Yeah.
But I like the attempt to make a sequel. Like, I thought that the idea of sort of bringing all those characters back in like the idea that it was a sequel, but not exactly, like sort of the events of the original Superman movie happened, but maybe a little bit more recently or whatever, and he flew off and we had a world without Superman. Like, there's a lot of cool concepts in that movie. It just didn't come together.
I would agree, even though I haven't seen the old Christopher Reeve Superman.
You haven't seen it at all?
Nope. I refuse to, because Superman sucks.
Okay. Well, listen to the soundtrack on YouTube or whatever.
All right.
'Cause it's good stuff.
I think I have heard the soundtrack. I'm pretty sure I have. It's like some of that iconic stuff it gets forced on you occasionally.
Tony, I know we're actually coming to the end of our time, but I did want to ask if you wanted to reminisce a little bit about our 249 previous episodes, sort of put the podcast to bed, say a little something about what it's meant to you or not. You can nope out too if you want to.
Just like close it. Done.
And that's it.
No, this has been one of the more interesting projects that I've ever undertaken in my life. Like, this is something that we've done for 250 consecutive Fridays without fail. Like, I haven't done any sort of project in my life that has been on this scale for this long, for this consistent, that has netted me as many friends as I've gotten, as many just, like, there's just something special about this whole thing. And I mean, we turned it from us talking on weekends, like on Saturday mornings whenever I was half dead trying to stay awake, into like a sort of career. Like we've been able to turn Human Echoes into something that is much more than what we thought it would be whenever we very first started this. I remember whenever we were first talking about doing this, it was one of those things where it's like, I asked you, could I get like 50 episodes? Like, and you basically agreed to that. We would try this for 1 year and see what happened. And for a while, especially in like the mid 30s, whenever it was just very, very slow going, I figured that we were going to end it at 52 with that Man on Fire episode. Like, I thought that was going to be the end of it. And then we put out like almost 200 more episodes beyond that. Like, it's just been an incredible long-term project that I've had so much fun with, and I've had, like, it's really hard to like even think that we're not going to be doing it for a while now. It's bizarre to me. Like, it hasn't registered yet. Like, I had a lot of stress trying to sleep last night because I knew it was going to be like pretty much like the end for this. And it's bizarre and it's interesting and it feels like it's the right time, but it also feels like you just want to keep on pushing for it and see if we can find the right audience for this, because we've found so many good people already and we just want it to be in more ears. But like there's a time whenever you take what you've learned from something like this and you move on and you do the next big thing.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, you might touch on this earlier, but I really appreciate the people that we've met through this. I mean, we're doing business with some of them now, namely Joe, and Hannah works with us, and she met us through a blog. I think I did some blog posts and stuff, and maybe I knew her before the podcast, but yeah, for
it was
sure.
Back on Unsanity Files, she was a fan of yours, and she met you through like some link thing where they like had you as blog of the week or something, if I'm remembering correctly.
John Jones, and you know what? I'm not going to start naming people's names because I'm going to leave a bunch of wonderful people out, and I appreciate the connections that we've been able to make and the fact that you guys have enjoyed any of this at all. And I hope that you know that we're not abandoning you, or like, I hope you don't feel betrayed by this. We didn't announce it a lot ahead of time. We'd made the decision, and we weren't really open to a lot of feedback. I did not, I guess Tony is a little bit more emotional about this than I did. I'm ready to do something new. I'm excited about doing something new. I've liked doing the podcast, but I think that I've gotten as good as I'm going to get at this iteration of this podcast, and I want to stretch into new territory, and I feel like we're leaving this at a great point, and carrying these skills on to something better next time. So we do welcome your feedback. I mean, if you're like really rioting, I'm going to kind of miss talking about movies a little bit, because the next podcast that we at least have in mind mostly is not a movie podcast.
I'm sure there's going to be 1 or 2 times in the first like 30 episodes where it covers movies because of the nature of this podcast. Like, I'm pretty sure we can find something that would fit that.
Little tease there for you guys.
Yeah.
I have considered that, but that is just such a saturated marketplace, and the rundowns are kind of seeing the same type of difficulty, where I feel like I've gotten better and better at doing those, but because so many other people are doing them, it might just become not worth our time. Like, we can focus on our time and our money on things that are maybe more productive, possibly. Maybe places where there is not so much competition for eyeballs. So
yeah, and it's like you've adapted those into some things that definitely are going to be sticking around, like the television recaps and things of that nature. Like,
yeah, that's something that doesn't have. I mean, there might be one other person who's recapping Blood Drive, and there are some people who are recapping Better Call Saul, but those products get better eyes because of YouTube and sort of the immediacy of it, and the lack of, it's not as much competition, so we can focus on being, I guess I'm pulling back the curtain a little bit more than maybe you guys care about, but that's sort of what we go through, is that we look at what's succeeding and what's growing, and where we think we can pull new people in. And the podcast has, we feel like, run the best course that it can on that particular arc, and we are not as excited about doing it each week as we used to be. So sort of incentive there is let's move on to things that make us either make us exceptionally happy to be diving into it, or something that's really pulling in the audience, preferably both. I think that at some point that excitement about the product translates into audience excitement. And I'm not saying we haven't enjoyed doing the podcast or that I don't like talking to Tony anymore, but
he doesn't. I hear it in every meeting. He's just yelling at me. I'm really just basically like the battered sister in this whole relationship, you know?
Yep. That's me.
It's nothing like that.
The abusive husband of Tony. And on that thought, let's end the final episode of the Human Echoes podcast.
I just want to say thank you again to everybody that's been supporting us for so long. Like, there are tons of you guys like Rich Alex who have been there since like the early episodes. Like, just so many people like David Webb, like just everybody we've worked with from like the writers arena, from all of this stuff. Like, it seems like we've really developed kind of a family here. There are too many of you guys to name right now, and I'm sincerely sorry that I'm not saying all of them, but like I've really enjoyed getting to talk with you. We've gotten to work with some of you guys. Like, we got to, like with Jen, we got to do our review of Rocky Horror Picture and everything.
Thank you. I was in the same boat. I was like, I know it. Dang it.
It's like I could tell you everybody that's in this movie, but not the title. I know, but like it's just been so great getting to do that, and like we get to game with you guys all the time. We get to do a lot of stuff, and I'm looking forward to doing that. And I think you guys will like what we're coming up with next. So
it
just
will
keep in
be,
mind,
by
it's
the
not
way,
an end. It's just kind of like moving on to the next thing.
If you're looking for that next thing and maybe you're not plugged into our Twitter or whatever, the first episode of the new thing, whatever it turns out to be, will be on this feed. It will have its own feed, but just so you guys will be able to know about it if you're not plugged into that, the first episode with the new name and everything will be there, so you can search for it on whichever podcasting platform you care to use. And I hope that you guys like it. And I'm glad that you've been here for this.
And if you guys have favorite memories of the show or just want to talk about it, hit us up on Twitter as well, at HE Podcast, or on our Facebook page.
We'll talk to you guys later, but not here.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.